Today in the garage, we're gonna light up a joint. Well, a CV joint anyway. We'll refurbish these, we'll also powder coat the axles and safety wire the bolts. Let's get started. So you can see that the joint moves in a lot of different directions. Now to get the stub axle off, I'll need this M8 triple square bit. You definitely don't want to use a hex bit on these bolts. So we'll loosen them up. Now there's a paper gasket right between the stub axle and the CV joint, and that's where we're going to put a screwdriver really carefully to pry them apart. You don't want to damage the joint. Now I want to make sure I'm right in the middle of the paper. And again, you want to be really careful that you don't scar the joint. And it just pulls off. We use a brass drift to knock the boot off the back. And now we'll have to clean this up so that we can see the clip that holds the CV joint to the axle. We'll start to get that clip off. And just being careful, it comes right off. Now we'll just pull the CV joint back and it comes off the axle. Now we'll pull off the special washer that's got a convex side and a concave side, and we'll just make sure we put it back exactly the same way. Then we just have to pull the boot off and all its greasy goodness. So here's the joint, and it's got several different components. We have the main part of the CV joint and the roll pins. We have this kind of cage here, and then there's balls all around it. And then in the center is the part that connects to the axle. You can see the splines in there. Now in order to take this apart, we're going to take the cage and rotate it so that it's kind of 90 degrees to the main piece. And then once that happens, we can pull this apart, just kind of like a magic trick. And then what we're going to do is take the balls out of here. And so once you push the centerpiece down, it creates some space for the balls to pop out. You just kind of have to manipulate it a little bit with your hands, and they all come out. And it is incredibly messy. You basically push them out from the inside out. And then to get this out, you turn it sideways just like you did the other piece, and it comes apart. Now it's time to get even more greasy as we clean these parts and inspect them for damage and wear. It's like cleaning up after the Exxon Valdez spill. Now you want to keep the pieces together here. Don't mix up the parts between joints. On the centerpiece, you can see on the back side where the washer rode up against it. So this part of the piece will always need to be against the axle, against the washer. And you can see that's where the clip was at the front. Here's a pretty common situation where the roll pin didn't stay with the CV and it came out with the stub axle in this case. And I'm not going to be reusing this stub axle, so I want to get that roll pin out. And the way I do that is I take just an old spare chuck from a drill and tighten that down. I'll put a vice grip on here. Starting to see it spin a little bit. I'll just work it out, and there it goes. While this is still compressed, I'm going to put it into the joint here, just using a hammer. I have these sitting in a warm water degreasing bath with oil eater. Stuff works amazingly well. It's about 10-to-1 dilution, and we'll put these in, and you'll see in a little while it'll come back and the grease will be gone. You can see it's already kind of gone off my gloves there. This is kind of amazing stuff. Now I'll hit it with a stiff bristle parts brush, and soaking overnight, you can see that everything cleaned up really well. There's like hardly any grease left. So it'll be easy to inspect these for wear and or damage. So here we are taking a look inside. You can see some shiny spots. And that's to be expected. I mean, these parts are like nearly 50 years old. But what you don't want to find are indentations or galling. You don't want to feel anything with your fingernail. This joint is actually pretty good, and what I'm going to do is flip it so the wear will happen on a different part of the joint. Since I'm a total pack rat, this is a joint from my collection of parts that I just can't bring myself to throw away, even though they're useless. So if you look inside there, you can see that they're in a lot worse shape. There are multiple indentations there. I can feel them with my finger, no problem. And you can see that this joint has been run both ways, and it's pretty much trashed. Okay, let's move on to the axles. It's supposedly best to keep the right one right and the left one left so the stresses remain the same. But for a street car, it probably doesn't matter. I don't even know which one was right and left on my car. I used Eastwood D-coat to take the paint or whatever it is off the axles, and it's pretty amazing actually. It's peeling right off, so I'll just scrape it down, and then getting it ready for powder coating, I want to mask off the splines. I'm going to shoot these with Eastwood semi-gloss black powder coat. If you've never done this, you electrostatically charge the piece using this button here and that clip, and shoot the powder on it, and it will just stick to the part through electrostatic. And that's what happens when you get the electrode too close. Then just pop it in the oven to flow and cure. All right, here are the finished axles, freshly powder coated. You got to remove the masking, and it looks like the splines are perfect. So now it's time to start assembling the joint. We have the inside piece, and we have to make sure that that this part of it goes against the washer. So it's actually against the part that goes against the washer on the axle there. That would be the opposite of where the roll pins are. We have our cage here. So what we'll do is we'll slip the piece into the cage like that with the washer part on the back. To put the joint back together, it's like a puzzle. The pieces need to be aligned exactly the right way. So what we want to do is get it so that the narrow piece on this is aligned to the wide piece on that. And then the wide piece on this aligned to the narrow piece on that. So the way we're going to do it is we'll slide it in same way it came out. Get it into position, making sure that the washer part is towards the back. And then one by one, we'll put the balls in here. So that'll drop in and it goes into that little channel. We'll slide around. Put the next one in. Next one. Sometimes you have to jiggle these a little bit. And then the last one, usually the hardest one, but not that difficult. Okay, so now you know that it's in right if you push down on this and it doesn't come out. You can see it kind of sticks out here. And that's it for the assembly of the joint. Now what we'll do is put it on the axle. We'll put a little grease on the axle so the boot will slip on easier. Don't forget to put the boot on first. Ask me how I know. Want to make sure the top goes in between those two indentations. Porsche calls for 4.1 ounces of grease per joint, so I'll squirt a little bit inside the boot and then about 2 ounces on the inside part of the joint, and I'll work it in really well to make sure that it's in all the nooks and crannies. You want to be really clean here too. Now we'll take the special washer. It's got a concave and convex side. You want to make sure the top of the hill is against the axle itself. Now I'll grab the joint and get it ready to go onto the axle. I want to make sure that the holes for the bolts on the boot line up with the bolt holes on the joint itself. So we'll get the splines lined up and get everything ready so that we can just push the joint onto the axle. I used a rubber mallet to get it in there a little bit and then a brass drift to make sure it went all the way home. Now I'll put the clip on, and you just kind of work that in. Takes a little bit of finessing to get it seated, and then tap it with a brass drift to compress that washer in the back and make sure the clip hits home. It needs to be completely seated in that little channel so that it doesn't go anywhere. Then I'll put about 2 ounces of grease on the front side of the joint and work that in really well. They sell tubes that are about 4 ounces for each tube, so that's an easy way to make sure that you have the right amount, 1 tube per joint. I'm just gonna wipe away the mating surface for the seal. Get that cleaned up. Take the gasket, notch it over the roll pins. The bolts I'm using from 914 Rubber are pre-drilled for safety wire. I'll show you how to do that. And really important to use new schnorr washers. You can see the ridges on them. And there's a concave side. You want to make sure the high side of the washer is against the top of the bolt, like that. Now I put some grease inside the stub axle, and I'll align the roll pin holes with the roll pin holes here, and just get everything kind of lined up, and at least try to start to get it in. The bolts almost always pick up grease on the way through, so Loctite really isn't a great option here. And another bracket. So you still get grease through it, no matter what you do. You can pull some of it out. Now just go around the joint here, pulling the stub axle closer in a crisscross pattern. Got my digital torque wrench set to 31 foot-pounds, or some people say pound-feet. Same deal here, I'll just go around in a crisscross pattern until we get to the right torque. Now this joint has been refurbished. Got good motion around, in and out. Now that the stub axle is on, I'm going to safety wire the bolts to keep them from loosening. Now, I'll probably only do this on the outer side because that's hidden inside the trailing arm. On the inside, where it goes to the transaxle, you can see the bolts, so I'll probably just stick with the schnorr washers there. Okay, here's the safety wire. It's a solid wire, and we put it through the hole in the bolt and just get a good length in between it. Then we're going to wrap the wire around the bolt and then twist it. Make sure you twist it tight, or you can get like a twisting plier, a wire twisting plier. That helps a lot. And what you're looking to do is create twists all the way to the second bolt. Now we thread the wire through the second bolt. Might be a little difficult. You kind of have to yank it to get it nice and tight, but it will come through. Then just take the other end of the wire and wrap that around the bolt, and more twisting on the back side of this to kind of anchor it all together. Just keep twisting it and get about an inch or so past the bolt. And then when you're finished twisting, you just grab your snips and snip it off. And then just tuck the little braid around the bolt. Now this wire does more than just immobilize the bolts. The way it's set up here, if one bolt backs out, the other one gets tighter. So the wire causes the bolts to be leveraged against each other. It's pretty cool. Okay, so that's one outer side done. For the inner CV, it's pretty much exactly the same, except it doesn't get attached to a stub axle. It gets attached to the transaxle. Still gets a paper gasket and all the grease and everything else. Just make sure when you do that one that you have a rubber glove or a plastic bag or something to put over the joint so the grease doesn't get everywhere. Thanks again to 914 Rubber, as always, for providing so many great parts for this build. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. And if you have, click the bell so you know when new episodes are coming up. Thanks a lot for watching. Be safe and enjoy.